on the subject, Christianity, a white man's religion. You see, that's Professor Brand Stanley in his book, Christianity in the 20th Century, pointed out that Christianity is not a Western religion. It originated on the Western fringe of Asia, and we tend to call the Middle East. Of course, we know that as early as the apostolic era, we saw how Africans were reached with the gospel and involved in mission. For example, we saw that at Pentecost, some Egyptians and Cyrenians were there at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. We saw Philip also, Philip reached out to the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8. And we saw also in Acts 13, while the Antioch church was thriving, we saw how Simeon in Niger and Lucius of Cyrene, how they participated to actually lay hand upon Paul, who was the first, during his first missionary journey. So that gives us a picture of the fact that Christianity did not really originate from Europe, which is not true. And so we see that from those evidence, we see that Christianity has spread, or there are even Africans who are involved in Christianity. In addition to that, we saw North African churches also during that period, because they thrived so much that they took part. In fact, they became the hub for Christian theology and gospel interpretation. Among them, many church fathers were raised up, people like Tertullian of Tunisia, people like Origen of Egypt, people like Augustine Hippo of Algeria, and to crown it all, even the Nicene councils was done in North Africa, which was so critical as to decide the type of books you should read. So therefore, we cannot accept the fact that Christianity actually came from Europe and reached the Africans, because Africans were involved before this. However, to be true enough, we know that for many centuries, the expansion of Christianity was directed from Europe, with key roles by the Portuguese in the 15th century and the 18th century, such as the CMS Church that played a key role in parts of Africa and even the London Mission Society. So from what we have said, we see that by the 21st century now has witnessed an exponential growth in Christianity and mission in Africa, Latin America, and even Asia. And this exponential growth of Christianity, coupled with a higher rate of globalization and migration, have greatly contributed to the shift of missionaries or Christians from the global south to Europe. Of course, certainly, some of them moved over to Europe through their local church or mission body like me. I came through SIM in partnership with my local church. And some of them come over to Europe as they are requested from Europe, like the Methodist Mission, Catholic, the Anglican. They may have branches in Gambia, for example, and they will leave Gambia to come over and help to serve in the circuits. Okay. However, because of time, I will limit our discussion to mission from Africa to Europe, leaving out Latin America and Asia. Of course, we know that looking at Europe itself is a very broad nation. Europe is divided, when I try to look at some statistics, Europe is divided into about 50 sovereign states, of which Russia is actually the largest among them. Europe had a total population of about 745 million, about 10% of the world population, according to 2021 UN statistics. While Africa, current population is over 1 billion. But African population is equivalent to 16.72% of the total world population. Now that we are taking some look at the statistics of Europe and Africa, let's listen to the big news. The big news is this, and we should thank God for that. According to Todd Johnson and others in the article titled Christianity 2018, More African Christians and Counting Martyrs, they pointed out that Africa is the most Christian continent in the world today, with over 630 million Christian followers. Wow. Africa, which was branded by the European missionaries as a dark continent, as hidden, they have now moved from a mission field to a mission force. It calls for celebration to the glory of God. What a paradigm shift in global mission, which can best be described as reverse mission, and rightly put by Prof. Andrew Walls. He said the shift of Christianity, sense of gravity, is from the north to the global south. Many times we come across this word, the shift from north to the global. This is Professor Andrew Walls. He's one of the renowned world mission scholars. And that's how he described the whole scenario as the shift of Christianity, sense of gravity from the north to the global south. Actually, other theologians agree with him that over the last 100 years, we see that the shift in global mission is actually the most dramatic since the history of Christianity 2,000 years ago. I echo again. Other scholars have agreed with this. They have agreed with our scholar that the shift in global mission is the most dramatic since Christianity story began 2,000 years ago. And that is why today we are here talking about the movement from Africa to Europe. And we can actually take a look at a few examples of how these Africans who are moved over either because of globalization, either because of economic reasons, we have some economic migrants, or either because they could actually be asked because of their output in ministry. They could be called upon from Africa to come over to Europe. Yes, so all of these can be examples. But now let's look at some of the examples which some of these people have moved over to into the West. For example, Britain's fastest growing church has been revealed as the Redeemed Christian Church of God. Is said to be Britain's fastest growing church, RCCG. Of course, if you look at it, the origin of RCCG is from Nigeria. And today, in Britain, is said to be the fastest growing church. Of course, in Africa, there is also the Living Faith Church, which has 275,000 attendants each week. In fact, it's the biggest single congregation in the world. The Redeemed Church and the Living Faith Church, sorry. So that gives us a picture of how African churches have really blossomed or thrived. And no wonder some of these churches have now sent other churches also into the West. Another point is the Calvary Worship Center. When I read, I realized that it's the most multinational church in the world today, with congregants of 108. It was founded by a Ghanaian, Dr. Sam Owusu, and currently also pastored by an African. And this Calvary Worship Center is the most multinational church in the world, with congregants of over 108 members. That's a multi-ethnic church. We also have people who have played some key role just to show the impact of Africans in global mission. That's what we're looking at now. We see key Africans like Prof. Kwame Bidiako, Samuel Ajayi Crowder, who's the first student in private college and the first African Anglican bishop. We see people like Dr. Joshua Bogjunko, who is the SIM International Director. And of course, we even have right now midst here the GEM president, which is also one of us from Nigeria. We also have our own brother with us, Reverend Tayo of Langham Partnership. He's actually the first African to hold such a position. So we see just few examples of Africans who have played key role in global mission because of the movement from Africa to Europe. Now let's look at some key practical discussions which will help all of us together to show that indeed Europe is in a decline. Europe has become secularized and a mission field to be evangelized. For example, UK has only 3% of evangelical Christians today. And you'll be surprised to learn that the government has approved same-sex marriage. And this is not only in UK, it's also true for other European countries. Same-sex marriage, transgender. And we see some of the churches in Europe closing down. We see churches also, some of these churches are replanting new churches. So this gives you some picture of how really Christianity or church planting has been in decline. The place where I serve here right currently at Harper, a church was in one of the places in Govan. That church itself is now closed. And eventually, Harper Church has taken over. We're now trying to replant the church. That same Govan where I'm talking about, there's a church which is almost 500 years. And that church is currently a big cathedral. And it's actually turned to a museum. Pathetic. It's a museum. And by the side of that church is a graveyard. This gives you some very ugly picture of the decline of Christianity in this part. Now let's look at, I want us to look at some few things also as part of practical discussions. One, for the movement from Africa to Europe, I want to take note of these points, please. It calls for partnership between local churches and mission agencies. It calls for partnership between local churches and mission agencies. For example, SIM. I came to here because there was partnership between my local church, EQUA, and the agency SIM. And for today, we are privileged to benefit from this podium, this forum, because of GEM Europe. We see also scripture, what they are doing. So it has a lot to do with helping churches to grow. Mission agencies, therefore, need to work in partnership with local churches if we need to really have a good impact of transfer from Africa to Europe. Then also, we need to be aware of the styles of outreaches. When missionaries leave Africa and come over to Europe, we need to be aware of the style of outreach. How do we engage the community? Some of the methods that may work in Africa may definitely not work here. I can recall sometimes when I am out on street outreach or door to door, and you greet some people on the way, you want to share the gospel with them, you just say, "Oh, sorry, I'm okay, I'm not religious." You can't force yourself. It's not like in Africa wherein you can just knock at somebody's door or stop on the way and people give you listening hearing. But here it's not like that. You've got to really be patient enough, and what may work for you over there cannot work here. And we also should need to be aware of the style of preaching or even teaching, depending upon the nature of our congregation. If your church where you are coming over here is a multicultural church, or a white-dominated church, or African-dominated church, then that will determine how you preach. Because in some of these white-dominated church or multicultural churches, we see that they depend more on expositive sermons. Don't just be preaching, just dropping everywhere around the Bible. No. So you need to be aware of that. And you need to be open to learn new things and put away your cultural lens. That's the fourth point. Be open to learn new things and put away your cultural lens. Come with an open mind to learn new things in that environment and lay aside your own cultural lens. Another point, beware of the fact that the community is individualistic and not communal, where you come to stay. By that I mean, in Africa, it's very common to have a communal life. We just knock at somebody's door, we have time together, chat on the road, discuss time together. No, people are very individualistic. So you need to be aware of that. Then also need to know that you need to learn to lean on the shoulders of those missionaries or Christians you have met on the ground. By God's special grace, since I came, like Reverend Tayo said, I've just tried to stand up on the shoulders of others I've met on the ground. People like my brother Tayo, and people like Reverend Simon Holloway. Some of them, you know them. You know, these are people I've met on the ground, and I just stand on their shoulders. I can recall when I was way back studying, my professor told me that you need to stand on the shoulders of others, then you grow taller. Another point also, if you're on the ground from Africa to Europe, you need to determine to develop yourself in your calling or ministry area in order to be more fruitful in your ministry. If it calls you to go and do some courses so that you can develop yourself. Then also you need to try to balance your work with ministry. Or if you are students, because remember that some come from Africa to Europe, not necessarily because they are missionaries exclusively, but some of them could come as students or migrant workers. But the tendency is that when you are here, you need to be conscious to balance whatever you are doing, whether it is studies, whether it is work, whether it's ministry, balance it along. So that, because the temptation is that people may tend on Sundays over weekends, because they pay more over weekends, they may tend to leave, not to go to church, and just go over there to take the walk. So these are temptations on the ground, and you need to be careful. And of course, again, you need to be intentional about your family to raise them up in the fear of God. Be intentional so that you can lay godly foundations for your children. Because, interesting enough, at the age of 18, children in the West have rights on their own. They could decide to leave your place if they want to. But if you have succeeded to raise them up in a godly way, whether they are 20 or 30, they can still stay with you because of how you brought them up. Then also, another point I want to note is you should see yourself as a missionary in your community and your place of work. See yourself as a missionary. Because people are looking at you as a lifestyle, whether you are there as a teacher, whether you are there as a pastor in a community, whether you are there as a student. Remember, you have traveled along with what you believe in, the word of God, and you be a light among them. Then Rivers Mission challenges the missionaries who work in Western fields to observe the context and learn from it so that they can develop missionary work. Because the fact is, each context requires a specific incarnational mission according to the communities and groups they belong to. So therefore, there's a need for us to really observe the context in which we are moved over to. Okay? And finally, mission is not done from a single fixed perspective, as the world is both local and global in any given context because of the movement of people in communities. For instance, it is certain that some ethnic groups are rich when they are missionaries from their own culture. Like among some of the missionaries that are here, There are people who are serving as missionaries to Ethiopians because they are Ethiopians. Some of them serve as missionaries to their own ethnic group. So this is also another dynamic of mission, especially under reverse mission when missionaries come over here. So in conclusion, we must be global Christians with a global vision because our God is a global God. Late John Stott says, Christians therefore have to develop global thinking if we are to follow the missional mandate. Indeed, mission is from everywhere to everywhere. Africa has played a key role in this. God bless you.